show, and I have one of our toxicologists here, Hunter Fleming, who will speak after me. I'm going to start us off with just some of the historical trends that we've seen. I'm going to go a little bit quicker because it's kind of the same trends we've unfortunately seen for the last few years. And I want to make sure to leave Hunter some time to get to some more interesting things that are opioid and kind of not opioid related, as we're starting to see other compounds be used with the opioids. So we wanted to bring that to your attention to see, see what we're kind of seeing and what may come in the future. Though even though not directly an opioid, they're being used with them. So we're going to see these effects moving forward. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start off with just kind of historical trends, what we have seen. So starting back in 2018, the agency started collecting the data of the opioid crisis and the fatal overdoses that came through. As you can see, which is probably to nobody's surprise, we've seen an increase in these opioid fatalities over the years continually, unfortunately, here where we've had in 2023, we hit 522. Through March 31st, we only have 89, which is on pace to be below that, though usually the summer months going into the winter is our highest month. So we'll see where that pans out for the remainder of the year. Again, this is just another visual representation of this from a month to month. As you can see, again, we starting off a little bit lower than the last couple years. But as I mentioned, usually through the summer months is where we kind of hit the peaks. So hopefully we see that continued lower trend. However, we'll have to wait and see. Even though there's lots of lines here over the years, what's really just to mention is these top three lines, this purple and blue, they're the last 3 years. So as we've seen, we've been higher on the last few years than we were previous years, as we continue to stop that trend. Specifically, we know fentanyl is kind of the largest problem here. So from this graphic, I really just want to show that over the years, if you can take account to heroin kind of went up and it has decreased over the last few years, where fentanyl has continued to increase. As we've seen this trend where it kind of started as heroin laced with fentanyl, there's been a movement toward a lot more, not even heroin, just straight fentanyl in those samples. So we're still seeing that trend, at least in our post-mortem population that we see. As for the fentanyl analogs themselves, anymore we really only see the fluorofentanyl. However, it has become increasingly more, we're seeing it more often within our particular casework. And outside of that, the other compound we see a lot is despropionyl fentanyl, or 4-AMPP. This is kind of a tricky compound because it has been found to be a very minor metabolite of fentanyl. So sometimes it's hard to distinguish if it is there because it was a precursor from illicit manufacturing or if it was a metabolite. However, from everything we've kind of seen and in the field, it's still pretty much just accepted as being a good indicator that it was illicit use or illicit manufacturing, because that metabolism would have to be kind of extended use and it'd still be very, very small. So that's a good indicator for us to see the kind of difference between illicit and licit use. This is just a way to show how much, just really more clearly, the fentanyl is really impactful. The only thing I was just a little preview for Hunter. As you see, we are seeing a very, very slight dip from 96 to 93% from the fentanyl. And maybe that is going to be due to some of the things Hunter's going to hit on. And we might see a little bit of a trend toward other drugs of abuse. However, I would not anticipate the fentanyl dropping off much, at least not in this moment. Outside of the illicit drug use, there obviously are prescription opioids that are still, coming into play out there, where someone could be prescribed. So methadone and oxycodone are the most common we see within this field of the prescriptions. They're not very common. So you see the oxycodone is staying relatively consistent. Methadone may have dropped a little bit in the last year, but they're kind of a very small population of what we see in the fatal overdoses. And then lastly, I like to point out the Narcan or the naloxone use. This kind of came up in request a number of years ago to see what we were seeing. And as you can see, we're seeing less opioid deaths with naloxone on hand. This could be taken probably two ways. One would be that it's not being used as much. I don't believe that's the case. As you know, the district is very good about having naloxone out there and advertising its use and getting the information out there. So hopefully this is just a good show that it's working. So we're seeing less overdoses where maybe someone was administered the naloxone and unfortunately was not revived. So hopefully this is a good indicator that it's being used, people are using it more proficiently and being more successful. And so even though the use of the Narcan was needed is unfortunate, this is hopefully a good trend that it is helping save a lot of lives out there. That's kind of, again, a kind of a quick synopsis because we only have the 20 minutes or so of the historical trends, which again are kind of consistent from what we've seen over the years, but I welcome any questions about that at the end of the presentation. But then I would like to hand it over to Hunter so we can hit kind of the highlights of some of the new things that we have seen over the year or so. So thank you, Hunter.
Thank you, Dr. Rosso. Let's see. There we go. Right. Thank you, Dr. Rosso. And as Eden mentioned, I'm a forensic toxicologist here with the DC OCME. And one of my favorite parts of my job is that I get to run some of our untargeted screening tests. And it really gives us a good snapshot of what is in somebody's system when they pass away. And so what I'm going to do here is highlight some of the emerging threats, or as we call them in the toxicology community, novel psychoactive substances, and kind of what we've been seeing, particularly this year, and then going back a little bit to some of our emerging threats that we've seen in the past as well. So the first one that you all are probably familiar with is xylazine. It's a Schedule III drug that's typically used in veterinary settings. And in 2023, we really saw a spike in this xylazine being detected, and it's really dangerous because it's being mixed in with fentanyl. So we are commonly seeing it with fentanyl. And actually in 2023, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy released a national response plan because of the threat level of xylazine. And also of note, it's not acting in the same way that fentanyl is going to act. It has more sedative effects. So Narcan is not going to be responsive to that xylazine. So, but it is typically used with fentanyl or mixed in with the fentanyl. So administering Narcan in the presence of xylazine would have that benefit if fentanyl is on board. And then as you can see here on the right, we have been increasing since 2020. And our 2024 data, as was in the beginning of this presentation, is only current up until March of 2024, just because we're on a 90-day turnaround time. So it's kind of like our lag time when it comes to our statistics. But if you take this number, multiply it by 4, we are on pace to continue to increase the amount of xylazine that we've been seeing in our opioid-related deaths. But something that has kind of come out of xylazine as well is medetomidine. It's another sedative that's used in veterinary settings, and it's kind of been acting like xylazine being mixed in with the fentanyl. It has some clinical uses, but it does have a longer duration of action. So it's going to, that sedative effect on the user is going to last longer than it does with xylazine. And recently in May, we added medetomidine to our scientific library. So we are continuing to monitor the prevalence. I know DFS is going to speak after us about the syringe reports and how they've been seeing it. We've only tentatively seen it in one case. It's still an active case, so we haven't confirmed it yet. But because of what DFS is seeing, we're prepared to see it. It's in our scientific library, so we are planning for that. And that is the great thing about the syringe report, is we're able to monitor these emerging threats, and we do kind of lag behind it in the post-mortem realm compared to the syringe data, but it's a great resource for us. Moving on to the next emerging threat are a powerful class of novel synthetic opioids known as nitazenes. They started to emerge in 2019, and isotonitazene, this one here, really was the most prevalent one. But there are many nitazenes, and we have added them to our scientific libraries. They're structurally unrelated to fentanyl, but they are more potent than fentanyl. And because they are more potent, more doses of Narcan are going to need to be administered to be able to reverse that overdose, depending on which nitazene is present. So like I said, we've been able to add these nitazenes to our scientific libraries to screen for them. And this year, we actually saw our first two fatal nitazene intoxications, which I will go over in the next couple of slides. But it is kind of similar to what we saw with fentanyl and the analogs. They're taking the base structure and just adding a chemical group or a chemical compound onto it and completely changing the structure, and then it's a whole new drug. So it's challenging from a toxicological perspective to kind of keep up with all of these, but we have added a significant number of these nitazenes into our scientific libraries, and that's how we were able to detect it, which I'll go over in those case highlights. But first, I kind of want to highlight what's been some trends from around the world. So the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, also known as UNODC, facilitates an early warning advisory. And so this graph here, it's actually controlled substances data. It's not actually toxicology data, but it shows the juxtaposition between the fentanyl analogs and moving into the nitazenes that we've been seeing recently. So the fentanyl analogs and that kind of wave of the opioid epidemic really started to take off in 2015 and 2016. And now in recent years, since the nitazenes have come onto the scene, those have started to increase, while the amount of fentanyl analogs that are being seen is actually starting to decrease. So similar to what we saw with the wave of the opioid epidemic with fentanyl analogs, we are continuing to monitor these nitazenes within the district. And I also want to highlight that we do submit our data and our statistics to UNODC as well to kind of show what we are seeing in the district on an international scale. And this is another graph showing how the fentanyl analogs kind of spiked in 2018 and have started to taper off since then, and how the onset of the nitazenes in 2019 has begun to increase as well, continue to increase. But for toxicology specific cases, UNODC has reported 179 toxicology cases involving nitazenes. And in 27 of those cases, those were the only substances found on board. So this is the first case of the nitazenes that we saw. It was a 33-year-old white male. He was found unresponsive on the metro. CPR was administered for about an hour and a half before he was pronounced dead. And the manner of death ruled by the medical examiner was an accident due to the toxic effects of these drugs that we reported in our toxicology report, which is also partly shown on the right-hand side. So we had a couple of stimulants present, methamphetamine and amphetamine. We had cocaine present, as well as cocaethylene, which is the byproduct produced when cocaine is co-administered with ethanol. Benzoylecgonine, which is a major metabolite of cocaine. Bromazolam, which is a novel benzodiazepine. Fentanyl, there was quite a lot of fentanyl detected. This is enough on its own to be within the lethal range. And then we also had those two nitazenes present in this case, which were metonitazene and pyrilidinone etonitazene. And so we detected the metonitazene, we detected the two nitazenes, and we're not currently confirming them in-house quantitatively. So we did send it out to a reference laboratory, but the concentrations of these are relatively low because they are more potent. So we're able to detect them at lower levels with our sensitive instrumentation. We are very lucky within our lab to have really modern and specific instrumentation, and really the most sensitive that we're able to use in the field, which is our QTOF, or quadrupole time of flight mass spectrometer. So that's where we detected these, and then we were able to send them out to confirm them. And then also on board, we detected ecgonine methyl ester, cocaine metabolite, lidocaine and its metabolite ethyl lidocaine, which is typically used as a cutting agent. We did have xylazine in this case as well. And then we had naloxone, and we don't quantitate the naloxone, but just looking at the qualitative data, there was quite a bit of Narcan or naloxone present in this case. And then moving on to the second case, it was a 58-year-old Black male with a history of hypertension and COPD. He also had a history of polysubstance use. And so we reported diphenhydramine at 0.15 milligrams per liter, morphine at 0.006 milligrams per liter, ethanol at 0.16 grams per deciliter. And so if you think of the driving limit for ethanol at 0.08, then that's twice the driving limit is what I like to compare it to. And then we had phencyclidine or PCP, which is pretty prominent in the district. Again, we had fentanyl in this case as well, not as much as the other case, but still a significant amount. And then the nitazene that was detected in this case was protonitazene at 0.001 milligrams per liter. Again, these are going to be lower concentrations. So it is a challenge for toxicologists to be able to detect these at lower levels, but we are able to with our instrumentation. And even though this is only 2 cases, it's not enough to really show a trend or a pattern or anything. It is interesting, at least to me, that within these 2 cases, 3 different types of nitazenes were found. There's not one prominent one that we've started to see yet. So again, it just exacerbates that challenge of the different types of drugs that can be part of the same class and being able to detect those as toxicologists. And then also we had despropionyl fentanyl, chlorofentanyl, our most prevalent fentanyl analog, norfentanyl, the major metabolite, and methamphetamine. And then we just reported this case not too long ago, so the medical examiner is still determining the cause and manner of death in this case. And then moving on to our last class of emerging threats, emerging drugs. These are synthetic cathinones or bath salts. They're not actually opioids. They're central nervous stimulants, so their effects are going to be similar to methamphetamine and cocaine. And so in 2023, we started to see the dimethylpentylone pretty prevalently in our untargeted screening methods. And so we were able to take the time to redevelop our synthetic cathinones method to include our most prevalent synthetic cathinones that we were seeing, including utilone, pentylone, N-ethylpentylone, and N-dimethylpentylone. And this is also known colloquially on the street as boot. So if you hear somebody talking about boot, they are likely talking about synthetic cathinones. And again, just adding on one chemical compound here really changes the structure of the drug. It changes, the effects that it can be having on the user and make it more dangerous. And it also is challenging for us as toxicologists, again, as these drugs start to pop up, really trying to stay ahead of them and be able to test for them in our cases. So since we've put our new synthetic cathinones method online, we've seen 29 cases containing pentylone or N-dimethylpentylone. Our average concentrations that we're seeing of the dimethylpentylone are 0.107 milligrams per liter, going all the way up to 0.482 milligrams per liter. And then we have pentylone at an average concentration of 0.039 milligrams per liter, going up to 0.133 milligrams per liter. And the pentylone concentration is likely lower than the dimethylpentylone because the dimethylpentylone does metabolize into pentylone. But our data, our toxicology data, isn't able to tell you if things were taken together or separately, or if a drug supply was tainted. We're only getting that snapshot of what was in that person's system and what was actively affecting their body at that time. So we're not able to say for certain if they're being used together or if it is purely a metabolite. And we wanted to bring up the synthetic cathinones because we are seeing them particularly with opioids. And so there was only one of those 29 cases that only contained pentylone and dimethylpentylone. Everything else, we found other substances with them. So in 58% of those cases, we did see fentanyl. Similarly, a big chunk of them, we saw cocaine at 41%. As Dr. Rosso highlighted, heroin usage is going down. So we did see that in less than 10% of the cases. And we also had some cases that had xylazine as well. And for all of those cases that had xylazine, for this, fentanyl was also present. 3% of the cases had synthetic cannabinoids. About a third of the cases had PCP, phencyclidine, which again is prevalent in the district. 13% of the cases had THC or its metabolite, THCA. 17% had our most prevalent fentanyl analogs, that fluorofentanyl. And then this chunk here represents 3%, including some prescription drugs like trazodone and quetiapine, dextromethorphan and diphenhydramine that can be used as cutting agents, benzodiazepine and a novel benzodiazepine, bromazolam, which I wanted to highlight too. We just got a new method online to test for benzodiazepines and some novel benzodiazepines. So I'm excited for that to be online to really expand our testing scope for benzos. And then we also had some other stimulants present as well, the MDMA and the methamphetamine. So again, the fact that the synthetic cathinones are being found with opioids, specifically fentanyl, really just exacerbates the opioid epidemic. And as it's changing, particularly as we see the niazines come into play and other contaminants like xylazine and medetomidine, it really exacerbates how it's always changing and trying to keep up with those trends as well. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank the DCHA for allowing us to present. Our emails are here. Please reach out. What we do as forensic toxicologists in the postmortem realm really is on the back end, and whatever we can do, if we can be a resource for you all, answer any questions, are you seeing this? Are you starting to see this? Or have any specific questions, please reach out. Whatever we can do to help on the front end of things that you guys are doing as clinicians and in the hospital, we're very happy to do so. And with that, we'll take any questions now as well. Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. I believe that's a capability. We can also see if anyone, go. Caitlin.